All right, we've been looking at parallelograms, and a parallelogram, by its definition, is a quadrilateral, four-sided figure in which each pair of the opposite sides are parallel. But that's not the only test as to whether a figure, an object, is a parallelogram. That's the number one. It's by definition that the opposite sides are parallel. But there's some additional tests to help us prove whether it is in fact a parallelogram. Now, one of those is that the opposite sides are congruent. So not only are the opposite sides parallel, but the opposite sides also have to be congruent. Another test is that the opposite pair of angles are congruent. So opposite angles are congruent. Both pairs of opposite angles, I should say, and emphasize that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Another test is if the diagonals bisect each other, then the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. And then another test is if one pair of opposite sides is congruent and parallel, then the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. So in example 1, which is on page 414 of the textbook, we're given a couple of quadrilaterals, and we're asked to determine if the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. And if so, then we justify our answer. So let's look here at this first one. We see that, well, this side is congruent to this side, and this side is congruent to this side. And so this meets the test that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. And so that we can say, yes, this is a parallelogram because both sides, both opposite sides, I should say, both pair of opposite sides are congruent. Okay, simple enough. Now, what about this next figure? We have to be careful here. I can see that this angle is congruent to this angle, so I got one pair of angles that are opposite angles that are congruent, and this side is congruent to this side, and so I've got one pair of opposite sides that are congruent. But what I don't know is I don't know what this is, and I don't know what this is, and I don't know the length of this or the length of this. And so I cannot definitively say that this is a parallelogram because not all the tests of a parallelogram are fulfilled. So you have to be careful here because you might jump to the conclusion, oh, I see opposite angles that are congruent, I see opposite sides that are congruent, but the key element is that both pair of opposite sides have to be congruent, and both pair of opposite angles have to be congruent. And in this diagram that we see on the right, well, we just do not know. And so therefore, we can't say for sure.